close this poll. So good afternoon, everybody. Great to see so many people here today again. I obviously didn't put you all off the last time round, so that's always a good way to start. My name is Trish Keenan, and I work for a company called 2 into 3. So today we're looking at more about the project animation. Okay, so what we are going to go through today's agenda, and we're very lucky we have Geraldine here joining us from the department afterwards to go through more what the departmental priorities are for the next leader program. But at the moment, we'll do a wee recap of what we covered in the first webinar. And then we will go through what the leader funding themes are all, what they encapsulate, and what are the priorities, and what are the examples of what they will fund under each of those themes. Interesting to see 72% is for social inclusion. My background would be more in the business and enterprise development side of things, but we will look at all three of the themes and the types of projects that can be funded. We'll also look at eligibility of your project as well as the applicant. And now what this is all about, my focus today is about project animation. How do we get a project up and going? How do we plan for this project? And how can we cut through maybe some of the jargon that puts people off? I know as an EU funded program, a lot of people think it's very, very bureaucratic and there's a lot of administration. This is not here to catch you out. It is just something that's a part of an EU funding program, and it's the reality of EU funds. So it's not there to catch you out. It's there to make sure the money is spent where it needs to be spent. So we will go through the eligibility and the criteria and what type of things can and cannot be funded, as well as a very brief overview of the application process, because the application process we're going to look at in the third webinar. So in terms of where we were before, if those of you that didn't meet with me the last time around or know of 2 into 3, we are a consultancy firm that work only for the nonprofit sector. We work right across Ireland. I am based in the north here and would have extensive experience within the leader program, both as a delivery agent on a leader project, right down to sitting on a lag board, giving out the grant, and now working on the consultancy side. So I've done the whole circle of where you would work in the leader programs. The transitional program came into effect in 2021 and will run right through to 2023 when the new program will take over. And what we really focused on in the first time round in our first webinar was looking at how will we develop a project plan? What needs to be put together? What partners needs to be worked with? How do we start that partnership working? How do we start the communications with these projects and other players in our area, as well as financial planning? How do we start to plan for applying for funding, having the match funding in place, and making sure it can be properly financially managed? Also, we just go back and we quick recap of the 7 principles of leader. So the 7 principles of leader are based on your area-based strategy. This is a local funding program. It's based on what is needed in your area. So your area-based strategy will be developed by your local action group, which is a partnership of voluntary social members, elected members, and they will distribute the funding. And that's who you will be applying to, and they are overseen then by the department. This is a bottom-up approach of a funding, and they want to see projects being delivered at the ground level. So it's not, they talk about top down. It's not them giving the money to the communities and saying, oh, this is what you need. This is the communities applying from the bottom up and then delivering them on the community level. But we're also looking at what is innovative about your project. When you're coming up with ideas and thinking about new project ideas, what is innovative? We also look at networking and what is the networks that you have built up in your local area or even with your neighbouring communities, and how are you cooperating with these other groups? So it's not that you're a standalone project or a standalone program. How are you cooperating? And that can be integrated and multi-sectoral. So that can be across different areas of operation or interests. It could be sport with health. It could be health with education. It could be rural tourism with the environment. So how is it cross-cutting across all of the themes? So we want to see an integrated approach from the bottom, and that's how you would animate a project for Leader. Project animation, somebody joked with me earlier on that this seems to be the buzzword at the moment. It's always been the buzzword in terms of Leader projects, is how to get these projects up and running and get them developed and actually draw down the funding and be successful in delivering. So I asked initially about the different themes and who was interested in the different themes. The first theme is economic development, enterprise development, and job creation. This is to see diversification in the local rural economies and to provide local jobs in the rural economies. And it's also looking not just at disadvantaged groups, but for all people. Now, one of the things is rural tourism. Rural tourism has been a huge growth area right across Europe, including Ireland. We're all now getting very aware of staycations, and we're all starting to look at holiday venues and destinations at home. Should it be for day trips or staying away or whatever it may be? So what projects have you got that would make people want to come to your area? And this doesn't have to be a big, huge heritage centre. It could be just something that instead of the local people instead of going to the neighbouring county to spend their money on the day out, they'll go to maybe somewhere that's 5 miles down the road. So it's looking at rural tourism, what can bring both your local, your national, and also hopefully in post-pandemic era, foreign visitors to your area. And in the past, that would have been a huge focus, but we're looking now more at what local people will require. Enterprise development, and it's looking at sector specific training, and that's not just getting your national vocational qualifications or anything like that. This is about how to actually help your businesses grow, and also businesses from underrepresented groups in the self-employed and entrepreneurial sectors, such as women, young people, and people with disabilities. But how could you develop a model in your local area to help these businesses grow? Should it be providing units or training, or is it actually helping the businesses themselves? Rural towns, there's been an awful lot of investment and a lot of hard work done through tidy towns developments and different local regeneration initiatives that would look at how you can promote your town or your village to live, work, do business in, come to visit, spend money, enjoy the local area, all of those, and even spend your recreational time there. So it's looking at what your towns need in terms of economic development. Broadband, there is a larger scale program available under Leader for broadband. However, at a community level, it's more about helping your local community access broadband and what is offered through that. We are living in a time where we're doing Zoom as we are right now, and some areas are still experiencing serious difficulties in logging on. I know we have some issues with some of our attendees here today, so we're preaching to the converted, but it's looking at how we can get people to access these rather than just the broadband lines. That is also being looked at by Leader, but not at a community level. So if we look at some examples of these, rural tourisms, we've been asked quite a lot about feasibility studies, and this time around there is funding, and there's always been funding, but there's a real push to do your feasibility studies and look at what is available and look at what you could be doing. Now that could be under enterprise development, rural tourism, rural towns, all of those three areas you could be doing this type of work, and this could be getting you ready for the next round of Leader funding. So look at a feasibility study of setting up a heritage centre or converting old units, derelict units. It could be a feasibility study in setting up a community renewable energy scheme. It could be a creative hub, any of those. So there is, and a feasibility study looks at, is this economically feasible? Is it worth the money? And does the community want it? So you're doing like a bit of market research in terms of what your community needs. Is it justified? But we're also looking at marketing activities, and that can be signage, that can be routes, that can be promotional materials. I know in the past it tended to be leaflets and things like that. Now we're looking at more of the app and scanning a QR code, and then suddenly you get like a tour around your village or your town. I've heard of recently of some centres have had to adjust because you can't take group tours. So you are now, when you come to each exhibition, they can scan and be given a talk and the information about the tourist facility that's there. It's also by promoting what's happening in your area, your culture, your history, the infrastructure. What sort of activities? Is it an artist's trail? Is it a walking festival? Is it a writing festival or a writing school? So it's looking at all the different things that's happening in your area. And Ireland is so rich and diverse, and there is such demand for that, both locally and internationally. Now, there is some funding there for amenity and leisure facilities, but it's more or less to support eco-based tourism and for adventure-based tourism. So there is a lot of restrictions there, and I will go into this bit more detail later on, especially when I'm talking about sports clubs, because I know it is an area people have asked about. So enterprise development, artisan foods, food trails is very, very popular now, and it seems to be a very trendy thing to go to a food festival. Creative industries, one-off renewable energy, so social enterprises. Most of the companies that will be here today, if you are working in your local area, you are set up as a social enterprise. So this can be, what can you be doing as a company, as a social enterprise? Rural towns. A lot of it seems to be renewal schemes, village enhancement schemes, flower beds, signage, shopfront schemes, all of those types of things. And what also unique events could you put together to promote your area, and what could be a stimulus for your rural town or village? And like I said about broadband, it's about skills development, so to be training or actually giving support and raising awareness of what is available online. You could even be looking into a feasibility study for a community broadband scheme there also. So I know there's an awful lot of information in there, and not as many people maybe are as interested in this side of things, but you will find that the cross-cutting themes between all projects will emerge, and you may be applying under theme one when really you are looking at a more social aspect of a project. So you'll be surprised on what theme you will be applying for and how you will be cross-cutting those themes. So if we look at theme two, which is social inclusion, we have low density in populations, and there's fewer employment options, and therefore there can be fewer service provisions there at your local area. And the main area that they're looking at in terms of accessing the provision of basic services is community education, training, social, cultural, and recreation. So this would be looking at your community halls, your community facilities. What is there? What services can be offered to help these people that need to reach them? Is it social isolation is being addressed? Is it employment isolation? It's all of these new areas. It can be a reintroduction of something that was brought out before, but go back to what the principles of leader. Is it innovative? Is it just replacing something that was there 5 years ago that we've lost because of funding has been cut? So always look at what is innovative and how you are addressing educational training needs, social needs, recreation needs, and community needs. So that's provision of basic services, but there's also rural youth. And this is again where we're talking about cross-cutting themes. How can we promote youth entrepreneurs? How can we give more pathways to young people into employment and accessing services? And how can they reach their full potential? Are they missing out because they're not based in the large urban towns and cities? And they're not going to miss out on any other opportunities. So it's about addressing what are the opportunities they may be missing out on in their area that they may have to travel to access, or can it be provided there? Is there outreach program availability? Is there the facilities there? going back down to broadband, is there the community broadband there for them to do this? So this is where I'm saying about cross-cutting themes and how you work in partnership with others who may be working at a different level. So some of the examples of that, and there's huge listing of, there's a huge amount of people here today who are involved in this area. Nearly 3/4 are involved in this area of work. So I am preaching to the converted, I know, but you're looking at farmers, fishermen, unemployed or underemployed people. That's another area. We're looking at the new communities that are moving into rural areas. I know where I live in particular, I know I'm in the north of Ireland, but we would have a huge agri-food sector. So there's a huge deal of new communities has moved in, and what are the facilities that are being offered to them. We're looking at travellers, women, lone parents, people with a disability. Mobility can be a huge issue, and especially with an ageing population in certain areas as well. How are you with these being addressed? In terms of rural youth, is it a youth club, cafe? Is it sport and recreational facilities? Again, there are issues there, but I will address those. Accessing their IT, arts-based, cultural-based, heritage-based projects. What would get them interested, and what would be a good project that they would get involved in? And could this, from a theme 2 project, become a theme 1 as a social enterprise? Could they become as an individual entrepreneur who will apply themselves? So it's how can it always work on? How can it be innovative and complement each other? Theme 3, rural environment. I'm not going to speak on behalf of the department in any shape or form. Gerling is here, but for me, this is definitely going to be a growth area. And it's something that, in terms of, the climate change agenda that is happening across the world, this is something that, we're going to have to really start embracing. And a number of young people, and there's huge movements here as well in this. So this is an area that it will grow, and interest will grow, and it's something that can be captured, and some projects could definitely be explored at this level. So for the next round of funding, and that will look at how you can contribute to the development of your rural communities by utilizing the landscape of your local area. What are the natural resources you have? One of those key natural resources is water, and it's how to conserve and protect this local water resource. I know some lags would have provided, and one in the West Coast would have provided water management courses and things like that. So, and that was carried out through the lag, and they delivered training for sustainable water management. So that's another area to look at. Improving local biodiversity. Many years ago, I worked on a wildlife park. So instead of doing as part of their Tidy Town scheme, they cleaned everything up. They made something look really, really wild, and it was amazing and was really embraced by the local community. And it, in some ways, was great because it led to less management in the future, and there was just a variety of species was able to develop there. It was along the Grand Canal, if anybody's based along there. So then, and then also thirdly, we've got the development of renewable energy. I was lucky enough to see many of these in action in Germany through some leader projects that I was involved with. And it was about how renewable energy technologies can be really used within the local community to generate an income as well as have an economic and environmental impact. So some of the examples here. What about an awareness campaign on water conservation? What about local conservation plans or even feasibility study into that? What about a community program for rainwater harvesting? These are all the different types of things other areas have used before and have been a great success in terms of improving the local biodiversity. Awareness raising and guidance on how to provide to protect this. An action plan on how you can protect your biodiversity, working with rural youth. Why not? Then you're cost cutting a theme into theme 2. Upgrading of your parks, rivers, and natural corridors. So instead of putting in a very expensive walkway, can we use what's already there and create a nature trail? So it's looking at something a bit different from what other areas have. And then again, development of renewable energy, funding for renewable energy projects, especially community projects, and building up awareness and the capacity for communities to embrace renewable energy. There are so many community buildings out there, and have they embraced, if they can, any renewable energy solutions to their heating, to their water, for insulation, all of those. Is there any questions, Maria, you need me to take a break on now, or do you want me to go on ahead?
I'd say keep going, Trish.
Go on ahead.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, in terms of the transitional program, which is out at the moment, there are a number of priorities which have been stated. Again, I'm not speaking on behalf of the department. These are all projects that need to be finished by the 31st of December 2023. And the department has declared that these are their priorities for this transitional program. So it's community-based projects that will address the pandemic. There's been huge pressures put on all of our communities and our individuals on how businesses can, expand, diversify, and respond to this pandemic, as well as Brexit. Any views along the border counties will be most likely experiencing that firsthand, but it's something that's been experienced across the country as well. But it's also about looking at how we can support new groups emerge that didn't previously receive leader funding. Looking at how they can, maybe they didn't access that much funding before. How can they really get in there? How can this transition program build up their capacity? And that's why I keep droning on about feasibility studies and things like that. Why not look into what you have to do at the moment, or what you want to do, and explore that further? Use this support. You pilot something, try something on a small scale, see how you get on. So there will also be, as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, maximizing the potential of broadband and the digital economy. And that will be looking at smart villages and looking at future working initiatives of remote working and working hubs and things like that all across Ireland. This is the whole point. People are no longer having to go into the office for 5 days a week or anything like that. People are working from home, and as much as we're all delighted to get out and about again, and I'm sure many of you were delighted to get out this weekend, there is still going to be some sort of restrictions, and work-life balance has changed and working conditions has changed, so that people will be maybe working from home on a greater extent. Excuse me. So this is a rural development program. So rural areas for the Leader Programme of Ireland is defined as any part of Ireland which is outside the city boundaries of Waterford, Cork, Limerick or Galway. So outside of the city boundaries, you are eligible. And this is where I want to try and dispel some of the myths and fears of people when they approach leader funding. I know at our last webinar, we only had something like 2/3 had applied. 1/3 had applied for leader funding and 2/3 hadn't. And it really is, it's a fantastic project on funding projects at a ground level, because these are projects that come from the community. They don't come from the department saying this is what you need to do. These local based strategies have been developed with your local authorities, with your local council representatives, with local community representatives. There has been a consultation exercise. So this is very much adapted to what you need in your area, whatever your county requires. So it's an amazing scheme that's out there across Europe, and it really is there to help local businesses, private businesses as well. I know for the purposes today, we're only talking about community and social enterprises, but there is a lot of schemes out there that can help you at your rural area. Now, the first thing in terms of you'll have a project promoter. The first thing you're always asked about, who is the project promoter and who is the project beneficiary. Your project promoter is the person who's putting in the application. It may not always be the same. It will be the same as your beneficiary. Your beneficiary will be a wider scope of people, a wider group of people, because it needs to be. It needs to be the benefit of your community. But one of the things they will ask for the promoter is state aid guidelines. It's called de minimis. Currently it's $250,000. Anything above that, then you are subject to state aid rules. That just means you are subject to greater audit checks and making sure finances on a Europe-wide basis is kept more of a track of. So it's for large scale schemes, and it is there, and you will be talked through it. It's not something to be fearful of. It's not something to try and hide, because it will always be shown up. But that is a check that will be made. So if people say de minimis rules, they go, what is that? It's just something to make sure that the state aid rules across Europe are abided by. You have to also make sure that you haven't been excluded from leader due to non-compliance on a previous leader application. So if your promoter was somehow, there was a problem with a previous leader project and you have been excluded because you didn't comply with the rules. Your beneficiary isn't insolvent, so it has to be a properly established business, and there's no other outstanding debts under other leader programs. And this will be due to non-compliance as well. But there could be, a debt of, it was overpaid, or there was a problem about claims. There is a great deal of checks and balances with drawn down funding. And we're not going to go into as much detail about that today. We're going to do that in our third, because it is so detailed and we want to make sure that we give it its proper time and attention. But they are not things to be fearful of. These are just paperwork, and as every company and every social enterprise and every community group is established, there is a guidelines of how you need to manage your paperwork, manage your accounts, and this is just making sure that those checks and balances are in place. So in terms of your project eligibility, it needs to be outside of Waterford, Cork, Limerick, or Galway, and Dublin. Sorry, I didn't mention Dublin the first time around. It needs to match the objectives and the activities of your individual local action group. So under each 3 themes, they will have an individual objectives for their area, which it stands to reason that Meath would have very different priorities to say Waterford has, or to Galway, or to Monaghan. So there are different objectives for each of the lags, and where they would have some priorities. But it's also about the rural development programme objectives, and I'll leave Geraldine to talk about that one. The operating rules are a substantive document, and Leader has a very, very tight set of operating rules for applying for funding. Again, these are not there to catch you out. The difficulty is you will have the same operating rules and administration for receiving 10,000 funding as you would receive for 100,000 funding. So regardless of how big or how small your project is, the operating rules still apply. And that is something that, as long as you are going in aware of those and you are ready for them and you have made all the proper checks before you go into this process, you'll be fine. They're not there to catch you out at all. So what can be funded? The important question: what can this money be used for? So it can be used for the construction, acquisition, or improvement of immovable property. So nothing that's mobile. So if you move it, it's not eligible. Purchase of new machinery or equipment up to the market value of the asset. There is an allowance now for second-hand equipment, as long as it is being independently verified and valued. It can be a bit difficult to prove, but there is an option there. Professional costs linked to the project. So it's your architect, your engineer, consultation fees, your environmental or economic sustainability. Now, this is eligible to a funding level of 12% of the full capital costs. So That's if when you're buying or constructing a site, and you then have professional fees up to 12%. However, feasibility studies is a standalone project, and that's eligible expenditure. The only problem with that is your feasibility study needs to be into a project that could be funded by Leader. So there is no point in saying I want a feasibility study into a mobile hairdressing salon, because that would never be funded by Leader. Even if it was a community mobile hairdressing salon, it would never be funded by Leader. So you cannot then apply for something that you would never ultimately be able to apply for funding for. However, with that, you also, the end of the feasibility study may say this is not a viable option. So you don't have to apply. So your feasibility study, if it's done correct, will say either yes, it's a viable option, or no, it's not a viable option. And you're not held to that as part of, because the feasibility study is a standalone project. So take it, for example, you want to do a feasibility study on setting up an artist's studio in one of your community facilities as a rural tourism project, social economy, and it's looking at bringing visitors in for artists retreat. So you would do a feasibility study on whether there was a demand for that, whether it was economically viable, whether there was enough usage of it, also in terms of the local community, would the community use it? If you're putting in artist facilities, would the local schools access it? And you would do a full feasibility study out of that. At the end of that, you would have, yes, that is a viable project, and you may then use that research to apply for a project. It may also say no, because do you know what? In the next county, there is a really well established artist school there already. And maybe if you worked with them in partnership, the best thing would be work with them and develop something that would complement them and add value to what they're doing. So, no, it's not a feasible project. That's the project. It's not the artist school, it's the feasibility study into it. It could also be a feasibility study into a community renewable scheme. So you want to put solar panels or wind farm or whatever outside some community property, community hall, heritage centre, whatever it may be. And it might say, well, yes, that's a viable option, but you need more land. So you need to start working with others, and you need to look at maybe some local farmers and things like that. And then you apply. So it's the feasibility study and what you're applying for, but you cannot apply for something that would never be a shopping centre. You can't go and apply for that, because you just would never get funding for that in the long term. So intangible investments such as development of software, acquisition of patents, licenses, copyright rights, trademarks. This is going back to what we were saying before. Everything's now gone online. Is it developing apps for your area? Can it be an app for your local rural youth to get to know each other, or access information, whatever it may be? Marketing promotional costs and hire if equipment deemed necessary. So that would be more for the likes of doing a festival or an event, and you had to hire equipment rather than buying it. So what is excluded? What's ineligible? Agriculture, fisheries and horticulture. Now, these are funded through another element of the Rural Development Programme. So mainstream agriculture is not funded through this at all. I remember many years ago having a project when I was on the board of a local action group, which was a flower. They were a garden centre, and they wanted to sell flowers, but she was applying for the funding to package the flowers. And the problem was to package them and market them, and for the packaging machines and for the marketing of them, yes. But Leader funding couldn't have anything to do with the actual cutting and preparing of the actual flower, because that was horticulture. That was not marketing or production. So there can be issues there. So be very aware of it. And the same with beekeeping, things like that. These are producing a foodstuff, and producing foodstuffs is not applicable and is not eligible under Leader funding. Fisheries, I haven't talked about it, but there is a separate fisheries local action groups that are available called the flags. And they are set up on a regional basis, just like your local action groups. But mainstream fisheries and agriculture and horticulture activities is not funded. Retail, this is me going back to saying a shop, things like that. However, there are community-based and farm shops. So if it is a community facility, if it's a community shop, or it's artisan food shops, or if it's a cooperative within your food shops, they could be eligible. But there are such tight guidelines. You need to contact your local action group and put in an expression of interest before you would do any greater detail. And that could be something that a feasibility study would really weed out and would give you an awful lot of information of whether or not it was a viable alternative for your area. Working capital, including stock. It's not going to buy stock for your for any business. Operational costs such as your salary, overheads, insurance, repayment of loans, anything like that. We would call them revenue costs. They would not be applicable. Costs associated with meeting a legislative requirement. So if you have a community building and you need by legislation to put in a disabled toilet, you cannot receive funding for that because you are following a legislative requirement. It's not because you need one. You want one, but you obviously need one by law. So there will be a problem with that. If you are developing your entire facility for greater access for those with any sort of disabilities, that's a different matter. But if you're just doing it purely, it could be also your heating or your electrics are not up to code, and that would not be applicable. Project, yeah.
Sure, sorry to cut across you there. I'm just conscious that Geraldine has to leave shortly.
Oh, so... sorry. I'm going to jump ahead.
It's fine. So we might just ask her to give her presentation now and come back to this.
That's all right. So we'll come back to this and I'll go back. I can come back. That's perfect. Thank you. Trish. I'd love a glass of water.
You just want to, okay, great. So, all right. So Geraldine, I will share your screen now, or your presentation rather. Oh, is Geraldine here?
She's still online, Emily.
What's that?
She's still online.
Okay. Geraldine, are you ready to give your presentation?
Geraldine with no sound.
I think you're on mute there, Geraldine.
Go on ahead now, Geraldine.
No, we can't hear you. Do you want to try leaving the meeting and coming back in? Okay. Thanks for your patience, everybody.
I have a couple of questions coming in, Trish.
Yeah, I'm just going to type up. Can I just say, I love the way everybody puts up where they're from. It's so nice.
Gives you a good sense of who's in the virtual space.
Do you want me to start calling them out, yeah?
No, I'm just flicking.
No, so Geraldine's in the waiting room, so let her in and see if this works. If not, we'll fire ahead.
I see one there, Glidden. What is defined as a rural town or village? What about an estate of 50 people, 2 kilometers from a large town? If your large town's covered, yes, you're fine. Just go to your local action group.
Hey Geraldine, do you want to give us a shout and see if we can hear you now?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay,
Brilliant.
So I'll share your slides now and just give me a prompt when I need to move on to the next one.
Okay, thanks, Emily.
No problem.
Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. And my name is Geraldine Crean. I work for the Department of Rural and Community Development, where my current role involves coordinating the various elements required to deliver the new LEADER programme, together with policy development for LEADER 2023-2027. And just before I begin, I would like to thank the Wheel for organising this event and giving me the opportunity to speak about the new programme today. Can I just go on to the next slide? Thanks, Emily.
Yep.
So while I was unable to attend the session on the 25th of May last, I did listen back to the recording of that event, including the Q&A sessions at the end. And with that in mind, as well as the overall aims of this afternoon's training session, I am going to synopsise, and there might be a little bit of overlap with what Tricia is saying. I'm going to synopsise the priorities for the Transitional LEADER programme, as well as the priorities for LEADER 2023-2027. But in order to demonstrate the overall strategic objective of the new LEADER programme and its desired impact, it would be amiss for me not to synopsise what is meant by the added value of LEADER, because not only does this underpin LEADER's rural development style, there will be a renewed focus for LEADER 2023-2027 to demonstrate its added value. Then our Rural Future, the government's 5-year rural development policy, was launched earlier this year, and it highlights the concept of smart towns and villages, recognising LEADER, particularly through its community-led local development approach, as being a key policy vehicle to support the development of smart towns and villages. Smart villages will therefore play a significant role during the next programme period, with it envisaged that the concept will help achieve greater coherency and a more integrated approach to rural development during the new programme. The European Network for Rural Development created a short video which illustrates the concept of smart villages. So in essence, it demonstrates how rural communities, through local action, can improve services for their areas. And for this reason, I have included a link to the ENRD's video at the end of the presentation, and it would be worthwhile viewing in your own time because it does synopsise the concept very well and how it might relate to LEADER interventions. So what I'm hoping to achieve today is for community members that are considering submission and expression of interest for LEADER support during the transitional period or the new LEADER programme, an understanding of the programme priorities, LEADER's added value, and the concept of smart villages will provide a good insight into the type of initiatives LEADER funding is expected to be geared towards during the new programme period and the reasons why. Next slide, please, Emily. So looking briefly at what LEADER is, it is a rural development component of the EU's Common Agricultural Policy, which means it is a continually evolving policy with each iteration running for 7 years. Due to delays at EU level in agreeing the new regulations and the wider EU budget for the 21-27 period, the 2014-2020 LEADER programme has been extended out to the end of next year, as Tricia said, to December 2022. This extension, as you might already be aware, is referred to as the transitional period. And what this means is that decisions on funding projects in each LEADER area will continue to be in line with that LEADER group's local development strategy, while also targeting interventions that pave the way for a resilient, sustainable and digital economic recovery post the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please, Emily. So here I just want to give an insight into the type of initiatives that might be funded during the transitional period by highlighting some of the priorities for the transitional programme. Capacity building, especially for communities that have not previously received LEADER support, will be a key focus for the transitional period as well as the new LEADER programme. Community-based projects that seek to address emerging challenges as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. These might involve, for example, building awareness as well as usage of remote working and community facilities, or projects that maximise the potential of broadband and the digital economy, including skills development. Projects that support rural businesses and entrepreneurship to, for example, reach new markets, create new jobs, and develop innovative community initiatives. And then, again, as Tricia alluded to there, given the increased focus on climate change mitigation, new and innovative initiatives in the areas of the green economy, climate change mitigation and environmental sustainability will be supported during the post-2020 period and beyond. Next slide, please, Emily. So looking ahead to the new LEADER programme, the LEADER unit are in the process of designing the 23-27 LEADER programme in line with Ireland's CAP strategic plan, with it being anticipated that the next CAP and LEADER programme will commence in 2023. I mentioned LEADER's collaborative approach to rural development earlier, and this is further emphasised at EU level, with LEADER 2023-2027 being programmed in the CAP strategic plan regulation under Article 71, which is entitled Cooperation. Also relevant to highlight is that the new programme is being designed to target the EU objective to promote employment, growth, gender equality, social inclusion, and local development in rural areas, including the bioeconomy and sustainable forestry. So these are broadly in line with the previous programme themes, but there will also be a cross-cutting requirement for all measures, including LEADER, to aid in climate change mitigation. The new programme will also see the introduction of what is termed a new delivery model, which will be more performance-based and less compliance-focused, meaning there will be a greater requirement to demonstrate the positive effects of LEADER, and again, the added value of the LEADER community-led local development approach. Next slide, please, Emily. So for this reason, I want to speak about LEADER's added value. I attended a LEADER workshop last week, which was hosted by the European Network for Rural Development, and it focused solely on LEADER's unique added value and how this can be achieved. While the link I include here contains the presentations from the event, which are worthwhile reviewing, responses to a question asked at the start of the workshop to a panel of people who have over 30 years experience in working with LEADER provides a good insight into how the added value element can be achieved. And the question asked was simply, what did you feel was the most distinctive added value element for LEADER? The first response was the importance of the LEADER principles, and these were synopsised as LEADER interventions needing to come from a local level and put into action locally. Then a second response highlighted the importance of capacity building to enable this local action, because there is a need, particularly for communities who have not received LEADER support previously, to work with these communities in order to develop a vision so that they know where they want to be. So it is important for LEADER to show that it has empowered and resourced rural communities in undertaking their own development. It was highlighted that it should enable a sense of belonging to a joint territory. So again, Tricia has highlighted this in her presentation. It's not just looking at one area or community, but cooperating with inhabitants of neighbouring towns and villages to ensure the achievement of the desired common goals. And then finally, one of the panel of experts advised for the following question to be asked of persons expressing an interest in LEADER support. And again, the question was simply, who will be involved in the proposed intervention and why? Further stating that where only one entity will be involved, and there is likely no added value, and hence it is not a true LEADER intervention. Next slide, please, Emily. I include a link to the National Rural Network's website on this slide, because one of their roles is to inform the broader public of the benefits of LEADER and its community-led approach to rural development. This CLLD approach requires time and effort, but for a relatively small financial investment, it can have a marked impact on people's lives. The NRN's website provides storyboards for LEADER-funded interventions broken down by the 2014-2020 LEADER themes, with these storyboards providing a good flavour of the types of initiatives funded, while also demonstrating the positive impact of LEADER funding, as well as the unique added value of community-led local development. Because of the renewed focus on LEADER's added value element for LEADER 2023-2027, this slide also includes additional examples of LEADER's added value, this time taken from LEADER guidance material. So the first source here for LEADER's added value comes under the heading of improved social and human capital. And this aligns really with the cooperation and collaborative element already highlighted as an important requirement for LEADER. So it might be the establishment of new community groups where none existed previously, or new members to dwindling community groups, because this really is the first step that shows local communities are being empowered to undertake their own development. Then the second area where leaders' added value can be evidenced is via improved local governance. And given the bottom-up nature of Leader and its community-led local development style, this might be, for example, increased stakeholder involvement in the community development process. And then the third source of Leaders' added value is through enhanced project results. So these being achieved as a result of the increased leverage brought about by, for example, the establishment of new community groups and increased stakeholder involvement, which should in turn lead to not just more sustainable and innovative projects, but also new project beneficiaries and increased partnerships and cooperation at a local level. And the next slide, please, Emily. So that concludes my presentation. I hope it has provided an insight into the type of initiatives funded by Leader and its objectives for rural communities and areas post-2020. So in essence, it is about including all members of the community in the development process to ensure an inclusive and sustainable approach to rural development, because all members of society can learn from one another. Projects should involve as many community members and rural development stakeholder groups as possible, because this cooperation and collaborative approach is what underpins Leader's rural development style, which in turn enables enhanced project results, a key requirement for Leader 2023-2027. And then just for information, I include 3 links on this last slide. Again, the link to the NRN page, which contains the Leader project storyboards, a link to the ENRD's video on the Smart Villages concept, and finally, a link to the Leader Local Action Group's contact details. So thank you very much for listening, and I will pass back to Emily.
Thanks so much for that, Geraldine. So I know you have to head out shortly, but what we'll do is share your slides with everybody so that they'll have access to that information and all of the links. And if people have questions directly for Geraldine, they can email me and I can forward them on to her. So I'll include my email address in the chat. But thanks so much for your time, Geraldine. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Emily. Thanks, folks.
Take care. And Trish, back over to you.
Thanks. Okie dokes. Now, I hope you haven't all been just stacking up loads of questions for me and ready to attack. So we'll keep on going what's ineligible here. So I think I got as far as, yeah, legislative requirements, things like that. Projects that have, this is where we'll come into the EU funding problem. If you've ever received EU funding directly or through a national programme for this scheme, it's not eligible. You can't match 2 funds which have ultimately came from the EU for one piece of one project or one piece of work. So we can't do that. Conventional motor vehicles. If it's got 4 wheels, you can't get it. That's the basics of it. Even if it's got 2 wheels, I would say, no, you can't have it. There is always been an issue about whether or not trailers and how we move machinery, you know, how they can and cannot be used. And you will always be told that somebody got some money for something that isn't allowed. But the rule of law by EU operating rules and all of that is nothing that has got 4 wheels can be funded. It doesn't say it as bluntly as that, but that kind of more or less what it is. Now, this is where, and I had one of the questions there that I just sort of glanced through and was going through. The race and sport horse industries, as well as racing industries, motor cars, sport horse industries, and as well as the greyhound industry. Now, really, it's saying the core services. So for a racetrack or anything like that, no, it's not funded. However, it's the ancillary services. So if it's a training facility to do with those get involved in horse riding or show jumping or motor vehicles, or if it's ancillary services, if it's about getting people involved, if it's about maybe even marketing as part of a local event, that is eligible. But the core activities of actually building a racetrack or a stadium or a stand or viewing platforms or anything like that, no, that would not be eligible. And that is something, just from another piece of work I do, you could apply for maybe in terms of sports capital program, but it is not something that you would be able to fund through the Leader program. as I said, though, if it is an ancillary service like a training course, or it's about bringing in local community groups to use your facilities, if it's about diversifying one of your rooms into a training room which everybody can use, that is eligible. So just look at what you're actually developing and think of the project that you're offering. Now, this is some of the jargon that I was talking about earlier on that you will come across when dealing with a leader application. Deadweight sounds terrible, but it's one of those things. Added value is now the new big saying. As I started off by saying in this presentation, project animation was at the beginning, but deadweight, can you proceed without leader funding? If you can show, which sounds crazy, if you could show a very financially viable social enterprise scheme that could be funded by a private institution, then you would not be eligible for leader funding. So when you are carrying out your financial projections and when you are putting together your leader application and showing those, you need to show that without this leader funding. And this is why it's being innovative. This is why it's cross-cutting themes. This is about bringing in other people. And that's why that's where more the economic risk, and leader will take that economic risk of funding you to see if it work. You have to show that it is viable, but you have to show it's viable with the leader funding. On most leader applications, you will have to show an options appraisal, or even as if you don't show it, they will come out and do that options appraisal on your application as part of the appraisal. And they will say, well, if we only give you half, or if we give you, if you applied for 100,000 but we give you 50, could you do it? No. If you give you none, could you? No. You need to show that this is reliant on that, and that's called deadweight. They will not fund a project. It tends to be a lot more to do with private sector, private individuals who are applying for funding, because in this time round they're eligible for 75%, and say they were applying and they already have 500,000 or 1 million in their account. If you can show as a community group or as a social enterprise that you have money in your account, but it is there for a specified reason, or it's there as a match funding, then that is fine, because obviously you will have to show match funding, but you need to show that this project cannot be carried out without the leader funding. Displacement, and this will come into the more important this time around with the added value and all that other added value and complementarity that they were speaking about earlier on. Are you getting an advantage over another? So we fund, this wouldn't be probably for most of you, which would be more in the social inclusion theme, but if you were going for the first theme of economic development, are you being given economic advantage through the funding? So displacement can be an issue. Again, it has to do a lot more with private sector, but if you're a social enterprise and say you're saying our community facilities, our community hall needs to be developed, why does it need to be developed? Why, if there's another one, say 5 miles, 10 miles away, what way can you cooperate? What way can you work in partnership? How can you complement each other? Your capacity to deliver, you will be asked about your capacity to deliver. What is your project management plan? Who is going to manage this on a daily basis? Who is going to financially manage it? Who is going to make sure all the money is accounted for and the claiming? So there will be questions about your capacity to deliver. And I would also say, if there's any of you here haven't received leader funding, the same admin for a small grant as there is for a large grant, like I said earlier, use this transitional funding to get some experience of it and then apply for a bigger one next time around, because it is a learning curve. Sports facilities, I kept referring to this and I've said it there in sports in terms of horse racing. You need to show who the beneficiaries are of this funding. And this refers right back to what Geraldine just said there. If it's an individual or an individual club, if it's only a GAA club that's benefiting from this, or if it's only the golf players are benefiting from this, it will not be funded, because you have to show how a community is benefiting from this. How is the wider community? And indeed, we are looking at doing community consultations. Feasibility studies is an excellent way of doing that, and getting how you can build up that partnership, how you can work together. So if you are a golf club or if you are a sports club, how are you building in other clubs to help you use your facilities? If you're a GEA club, who else are you involving? Are you involving the local schools? Are you involving any of the local youth groups? All of these things, you have to show the partnership working. So who are the beneficiaries of this funding and what is the community impact? I've bombarded you with so much information, so I'm just going to say this. Remember your 7 leader principles when you're putting in an application. Anybody here now who is considering doing one and has an idea and wants to further animate that project idea, put in your expression of interest to your local lag. And you'll get a yes or a no. If you get a maybe, they'll chat to you about it. They'll be very, very helpful. So work with them and just make sure you address their local development strategy as well as the themes of leader. If you are successful after stage 1, then you'll put in a full application, which you will have to have all your procurement. So any sort of tenders you'll have to go for, that will all have to be complete as part of your application, as well as any planning permission. That all has to be in place before you can submit an application. It's not one of these that you can do as you go on along. It has to be done before your application is submitted. And again, remember your 7 leader principles. So what networks are you part of? Are you cooperating with any other local projects? Do you have any cross-cutting themes or partners? Does this project fit the local action group strategy? What themes and sub-themes of the local development strategy are you covering? What is innovative about this project and how widely is the community involved? So look at those 7 key principles before you even go down the route of starting to animate a project and get an application in. And we'll take some questions, but I'll leave my email address up there for you just to anybody needs it, and we'll take some questions. Maria, I know there was some from before and I tried to answer a few.
Yeah, you addressed the first one. So the next one is, will leaders support feasibilities for community-owned energy?
Yes.
Straight up. You might have addressed this actually. What is the timetable for applications? Where can one find the application form? Will this be covered today?
Right, the application form will be downloadable from your local action group, purely because it has a logo of whoever the individual one is, and it is literally your name, address, who is the promoter, what sort of money you're looking for, and you give them a synopsis, an overview of what you intend to do. So go on to your local, could we see the 7 principles? Yeah. So go on to the local action group website and of who you are. I can give out, do you have that as a list, Emily or Maria? I can give that out as a list if you need.
Oh yeah, I just entered in the chat,
details.
and the follow-up email will send a link to the list of local action groups.
That's no problem. I have all those anyway with their email and their website, so I can send that in as part of the pack. And they get an expression of interest, go on their websites, most of them have them on their websites, and put in your expression of interest, and your full application then form comes out after that. Timescale, sorry, timescale. What happens is your expression of interest goes in and you will get a very quick yes or no. Then after that, when you do your application, you have to do your procurement. So if you're going to be buying anything or getting anybody's facility services or anything like that there, you need to follow that. But it depends how quickly you can turn that around, and your application, if you need your planning permission as well, how quickly you turn it around. Once you submit it, because there is no deadlines, once you submit it, the local action groups will assess it, come out and do a site visit, and then it will be gone through the assessment stages, and then it will go through the local action group assessment, and then you'll get a decision. They are talking about from when they receive a stage 2 application to actually making a decision is about 3 months. So it's quite quick.
What is the rate of funding for nonprofit enterprises for construction and works? So capital works.
75%. What I would say though, if you are going for construction works, I would suggest there's lower levels available this time around because the transitional fund is smaller. I would get all your plans in place and then apply the next time round at 2023. However, if you can't wait, you could apply. Some groups are giving up to 30,000, some groups are giving up to 150. It depends how much money a local action group received.
Yeah.
Submit an application that relates to 2 different themes. That's fine. Your application will just ask you what themes, and you will tick what themes that you're doing. Match funding for a feasibility study, yes, because you get it up to 90%. So you'll need to show your 10% match funding.
And there's a question there about community allotments. Are they eligible for funding, and if so, what theme?
Yes, community allotments, and you could either go for, if you're selling the fruit and veg, they could be under theme 1, social enterprise, or they could be under theme 3. But the application is for leader, and you say how you are addressing your themes. You don't have to apply for theme 1, 2, or 3. So you can actually say, we are cross-cutting theme. We are addressing, and that's what they want to see. They want to see as many of their objectives being met.
What about project manager salary?
No salaries.
I might just add in there that if that's a private enterprise, it might be worth having a conversation with your local enterprise office or Enterprise Ireland, depending on the size of your business.
Local enterprise office is the main one, and that is who you are being signposted to.
What would be next now?
Your match funding can come from a third-party funder as long as it's not EU based. Yes, you can apply if you've had previous leader funding. It shows your capacity. Have I missed any other one? There was another one there for feasibility.
I think that's it, Trish.
Is there anything else anybody even wants to just ask me directly?
I think Brendan from Clare Island has his hand up. If Brendan, you want to ask a question?
Yep.
Yeah, it's just because out here on the island, I've got no one to talk to.
Hello,
I'm
Brendan.
on an island too.
Sorry, no, actually what I wanted to say was, I wanted to ask, it's this thing about the transitional funding and the fact that one of the criteria at the start says that it's for groups that haven't had funding before.
No, they're showing preference. They would like to encourage, not showing a preference, they would like to encourage others.
Okay. All right. Okay. That was because I was just, that's why I wasn't sure whether it was worthwhile doing. Thanks.
No. It's just they're trying to encourage. They want new applicants to come in, really.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Sorry, there was somebody said that their question was at the very beginning, but I didn't answer it. Do you want to ask me it directly? Or do you want to pop it back up in the chat box?
Yeah, that was Alicia Temple. I'll read it out. With regards to sport horse industries, what about training facilities relating to this industry, i.e. for children with special needs and the use of these animals for recreational purposes? Yeah,
that's what I was saying. You need to show where you're using the facility for. So if you're like, it depends on what you're using the money to buy. Is the money to buy the horses? Is it to buy equipment? It really would depend. It wouldn't be eligible for buying horses, but it would be eligible if you had to buy any sort of accessibility equipment or anything like that. As either assisted technology, would this be eligible? It depends on what the sector is, on what the technology is, but yes. If it's about encouraging those with special needs or any sort of disadvantaged groups to get in access to your facilities, then yes. But I don't really know exactly what the assisted technology is for or what the business is. If the money was for construction of an arena, if the money was for construction of an arena, if it's just for your sports club, you would need to put a very, very strong argument in for who you're working with, and who is going to access this. If you are applying as a private individual, that's a different matter. You would be applying just as a private equine company, an equestrian company. So you could apply and you would be under different funding streams as a private individual. But I'm only really talking about here for community. So if you're a community run facility, you would need to apply and show who's going to be using it. And have a very strong argument for that. Donald O'Shea.
Hello, Patricia. Yes, please. I've sent an email there to Emily just while you were speaking earlier, but you might be, since you had a bit of opportunity there, you might be able to elaborate a little on it's a mental health awareness training program, which I've been looking at advancing. Now, in fairness, the Wheel have been very helpful and supportive there. They give me a list of a number of areas where I can look into, and I am in negotiations with my legal entity on this. But I just want to try to ascertain, Patricia, if I may, please, they're separate entities. I don't particularly want to start calling them out, but they're very well listed to me and I'm working with them. But are they working in conjunction with the Wheel, or is the Wheel still likely a possible outlet? So it's a mental health awareness training program in conjunction with the disability sector. So I take it covers obviously the social inclusion perspective, but in view of the capacity of it, is the Wheel as a standalone still a likely possible outlet? Because from what you've said today, I don't think mine fits in under the remit of the leader in itself.
If you're a national, I'm not speaking on behalf of the Wheel, I'm here, you know, as a trainer, but I would say if you're delivering a project across the net nationally, it's not a leader funded project. It has to be a locally based. So you have to be, it's a bottom up. So it has to benefit those that you are based with. So you would have to be, say, based in Carlow and you are delivering the funding or delivering the program in Carlow. So you'd apply to Carlow. Does that make sense?
I suppose a unique aspect of this, Patricia, over the years, I've had a number of engagements at both EU level, at national level and so on. So I'm still probably undecided, and I'm in touch with the legal entities, I say, to determine whether it's going to be on a national scale or whether it's a EU level. And obviously the longer I leave that open, would you regard to you know, complete the process, probably the better. So I think from a national perspective, if I focus on these entities that have been brought to my attention, that's probably the primary way for me so far. And the only other question I was sending then is, and I accept maybe you can't speak on behalf of the Wheel, is maybe Emily, I'll link in with you perhaps on that just to clarify if the Wheel is still a likely probable in addition to the list which I've got, because obviously it's going to be one of the primary questions for my legal entity. So I'm just trying to get the net position there.
Yeah, that's no problem, Donald. I'll follow up with you directly about that.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks,
Yeah.
Patricia.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Brendan Tobin from Clare Island. If you seek funding from Leader, would this impact any future application for further funding? No, it depends on what you're applying for. You can't apply for the same thing twice, obviously. But if it's one, is you as an entity in if your organization and you're applying for a project, to say you've applied for Leader now will not impact a future Leader project. No, it wouldn't.
It was more in the thing that it was Geraldine who was talking about it, and she was talking about how you wouldn't get Leader funding if you'd had EU funding, or either directly or indirectly for a project. So if we had a project which was like sort of a large island project, you had some money for Leader to build one of the buildings, but you have, you know, this larger rural regeneration grant thing, and so you're playing them together. You know, is there a potential conflict there? There
is. You have to show that they would be totally mutually exclusive, so that the money, if I make an analogy, you're building a building, you can't have one half of the building paid for by Leader and the other half paid for by another that's funded through EU. It'd have to be two separate buildings and two separate uses and two separate objectives. So one could be the outhouse and one could be a kitchen. And I'm being very, very crude in how I explain it, but I'm just trying to get it across. You can't have the same project funded by the EU twice. It either has to be either or. You can't match. So you could get 75% funding from Leader and the other 25% could come from the local authority. Now that's fine because it's coming from the local authority. It's not coming from the EU. So you have to be very careful where that money is coming from, the other 25%, you know? So that is, but if it's two totally separate projects and you can show they are mutually exclusive, then you have an argument there. It might be an argument that's hard to fight, but you do have an argument if you can show how they are mutually exclusive.
Thanks.
Okay. There was another one there. Bartley Conroy, if you're going for plan, is there a maximum amount of money you can apply for? Within the transitional program, everybody got a different amount, and there wasn't as much given to some as others, because this is only a transition. So some groups are given out, local action groups are given out a maximum of 30, others given out a maximum of 150. So it really depends on where you're based. But if you're going for planning, you could wait till the next round, which would be a bigger pot of money. Is there a limit on costs for renovation and what percentage is grant funding? 75% for your renovation, and again, it's down to who your local action group is and how much money they received under the transitional program.
I think Faye Hayden has her hand up there.
Yeah, work away.
Faye, if you want to unmute yourself.
Sorry, I cut my thumb on break and everything's a little bit cumbersome at the moment. So quick question, one of the features within is it has to have a wider need within the community, that it can't just be specific to the golf club or the GAA club or that kind of thing. Can I just ask, where does that fit in from a perspective of operating services for children with special needs? Because obviously they're within the community, but they are a specific group within the community. So is it that there has to be else what you're offering can offer to other people? Is it that you can offer a service that creates inclusion, so non-disabled children may come in and be part of it, or is it that special needs is just considered that it is a community service?
Special needs are a community service.
So that's
so there is a broad range of people that will be involved within terms of special needs, and they are a specific disadvantaged group. So no, special needs is fine.
So even if it is specific to, say, autistic children?
It's young people, it's rural youth, and it's a specific sector of the rural youth. I can't see it being an issue, because in terms of social inclusion, they are one of the listed groups, and you're providing one of the basic services in a rural area. It's something maybe to run past your lag, but from my reading of any sort of guidelines and operating rules, no, it wouldn't be an issue.
Great, thank you.
I'm sorry, your hand's up as Galaxy A5. Hello, yeah. Okay, anybody else?
Sounds like a space job.
Hello. Volunteer input be used as match funding. In past, it always was. Maria, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, in theory, it can. I've come across it.
Yeah.
It's a nightmare for everyone involved. And my advice would be, don't do it. It's, in the end, it's just not worth it in terms of recording the hours, valuing the hours, everything. If there's going to be a benefit in kind, if you could use land or a contribution in the form of a building, yes. But volunteer hours are a nightmare. I don't know whether you'd agree, Trish.
Well, that's what I said. In theory, yes.
Yeah.
Because I know they make you do timesheets, and they make you put a value on somebody's time. And it's like saying, are they skilled? Are they not? And they ask you for details of that person that actually is the volunteer, which they may say, oh, hold on, I'm not filling in timesheets for you. It is a logistical nightmare. And the problem is when you get checked on your site visits, they will go through these things on you, and they will ask, and they will say, well, can you prove that such and such was there from 5 till 10 on Tuesday night digging, and we're going to value labor and work at so much per hour. Whereas then you'd say, well, we had an accountant did this, but we're valuing his time at 50 euros an hour, and it it is a nightmare. If you can get round it, get round it. Honestly, I think it's terrible, because I think in the days of getting people's volunteers' time, I think it should be recognised, and I think it's a great way to join in. But I'll just use this as an example. I would always be careful. I would have had been in the past, you know, rural farms would have asked for farm diversification grants. And I know this is a private sector, but just to explain where I'm coming from. And I would say, be careful what you wish for. And they would be like, what do you mean? What do you mean? And they're going to do up that shed, and that will do the wife or the daughter or whatever as a wee office or workspace or whatever, and keep it within the family, and they're going to run their wee business from there. And I'm going, that's okay. Well, you know, you're going to have to get planning. And they're like, why? Are you sure it's on my land? Who would object? You're going to get planning. You know, you might have to pay business rates or rates on that. And you were like, what? And I'm going, and you know, you can't use your own tractor. You're going to have to use a contractor, because we can't count your hours in as the match funding. So, and then they were saying, and you know, you couldn't just get, like, for the benefit of the tape, I would never know anybody that does this, get stuff cash in hand. You're going to have to go through and get an invoice for that. And you're going to have to pay for that. And you're going to have to pay your VAT on that. And you're going to have to do this. And they're like, oh. So in terms of, you know, the paperwork that you will be checked on, they will check it all. So that's why I'm saying, use as a social enterprise, you have to follow these rules. It has to be done. And that's just, this is how it's, but it is an amazing source of income for local communities out there. It is fantastic, because it comes from you. Somebody's not telling you what you need.
There's a question there. Would a 10-year lease count as match funding? I think that is a great resource for communities.
If you're being given a 10-year lease, yeah, but you would just have to get a value on it.
Yeah, you just have to get a professional valuation on it, and that can be used as your match funding. So that's a great option for communities.
I think we have kept you quite long, and we have bombarded you with information. Next time around, what I'm planning on doing is actually going through the application forms and giving you background of what needs to go into each of these different stages. What is the paperwork needs to be done? What is the procurement rules? Because there's so many different rules in terms of what you will be applying for and how you'll be doing all of that. So we'll go through the procurement and I will go through the actual application form. I will go through any of these sort of the checks that you would get, the site visits, the type of paperwork that they'll ask you for. They talk about these Article 45s and 48s and all of this. I'm just trying to cut through the jargon and the terms for you so that you know this is not something to be fearful of. It's just something that's always going to be there, that you can just get ready for it. Be proactive, as I say, and just be ready for these questions to come your way.
Thanks so much, Trish. So we will send everybody a follow-up email in the next few days with all the presentations from today, a recording of the event, and the contact details for Trish and Maria if you have any follow-up questions that didn't get answered today. And as Trish mentioned, we're having our third and final leader training on the 22nd of June at 10:30 a.m. And that will be more around the application and supports for you as you move through the application process. So thanks a million, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, all involved. That was great. Really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brendan.
Cheers.
So Trish, I might just end this and send a link to my room. Yeah.
That'll do.
Maria,
Great.
if you want to join as well.
Yeah, no matter.
Okay.
Great. Thanks a million.
Thanks. Bye.